7 years. That's a long time to be someone's backup plan. Daniel was 22 when he first met her. They were at a university farewell party, the kind where everyone pretends they're not nervous about the future. She walked in late, laughed at something her friend said, and Daniel completely forgot what he was talking about. That was it. That was the moment. He didn't rush. He wasn't that kind of person. He was quiet, thoughtful, the type of guy who remembered small details. Your coffee order, the name of your sister's cat, the thing you mentioned once about wanting to visit the mountains someday. He showed up for people. He showed up for her. They became close over the next few months. Long phone calls, late evenings, shared playlists. She told him things she hadn't told other people. He listened every single time without making her feel like a burden. And somewhere in there, feelings grew. Real ones, at least on his side. The problem was, there was someone else. There had always been someone else. He was from money, old money, the kind of family that had their name on buildings. He wasn't cruel or obviously bad. He was just unavailable, emotionally absent most of the time. He would disappear for weeks and then reappear like nothing happened, and she would forgive him almost immediately. Daniel watched this happen from the outside and said nothing. He thought, maybe if I'm patient, she'll see. Maybe if I'm consistent, she'll understand what she actually has in front of her. So he waited. And in the spaces between her and that other guy's on-again, off-again thing, Daniel was there. He was her comfort, her consistency, her safe place. And he genuinely didn't mind it at first, because being close to her felt like enough. But slowly, over months and then years, it started to weigh on him. There were times when she chose him, genuinely chose him. Weekends where it felt like they were building something. Moments where she looked at him like he was the most important person in the room. And Daniel would think, okay, this is real. This is happening. And then the other guy would call, or text, or just show up, and she would shift. Not dramatically. She wasn't a villain about it. She would just become a little more distant, a little less present, and Daniel would understand without her having to say anything. He never created a scene. He never gave her an ultimatum. He told himself that was because he respected her, but honestly, part of it was fear. Fear that if he pushed, she would simply choose the other person officially, and then he would have nothing. So he stayed in the in-between, comfortable enough to be there, never secure enough to fully belong. 5 years in, he had a conversation with his older cousin who was visiting from abroad. They were sitting on the roof of Daniel's apartment, eating leftover rice, and his cousin looked at him and said, "You look tired." Not physically tired, the other kind. Daniel laughed it off. But that night he lay awake thinking about it, and he realized his cousin was right. He was exhausted. Not from work, not from life in general. He was exhausted from hoping. That should have been the moment he walked away. But he didn't. Not yet. Year 6 and year 7 blurred together. He started working more. He had this idea for a software startup that solved a specific problem in supply chain management. Boring to most people, incredibly important to businesses. He began spending his evenings building it instead of waiting by his phone. And for the first time in years, he started feeling like himself again. Like someone who had a direction. The actual ending came quietly. No big fight. No dramatic confrontation. She called him one evening while he was in the middle of reviewing a pitch deck. She sounded happy, which he noticed immediately, because she hadn't sounded like that in a while. She told him that things were getting serious with the other guy, that they were talking about moving in together, that she really valued Daniel's friendship and hoped that wouldn't change. Friendship, he said, congratulations. He meant it to sound normal, and he thinks it came out normal. He ended the call, put his phone face down on the desk, and sat very still for a while. Not crying, not angry, just sitting with the weight of 7 years pressing down on his chest. Then he opened his laptop and went back to the pitch deck. He never called her after that. She texted a few times over the following months. Casual things, checking in, sending him an article she thought he'd like. He responded briefly and politely. And gradually, like most things that aren't fed, the contact faded. What happened next is the part that sounds like a movie, except it wasn't dramatic at all. It was just years of quiet, unglamorous work. Daniel put everything into his startup. He had almost no savings, borrowed some money from his father, and spent about 18 months genuinely not knowing if it was going to work. There were nights where he questioned everything. There were moments where the easier path, just get a normal job, let this go, looked very appealing. But something had shifted in him after that phone call. He stopped waiting for things to happen. He stopped hoping someone else would come along and make him feel like he was worth investing in. He decided to invest in himself first and see what happened. The company started picking up traction in its third year. Small clients first, then medium-sized ones, then a contract with a regional logistics firm that changed everything. They needed to hire. They got attention from investors. Daniel found himself in rooms he had never imagined being in 2 years before, talking to people who took him seriously in a way that still surprised him. By year 5 of running the business, he was doing well enough that the word success started feeling accurate rather than aspirational. By year 7 of the company, exactly 14 years after that university party where he first saw her, his company went public. The valuation made the news. His photograph ended up on the front page of a business magazine. He looked calm in the photo because he genuinely was. He had stopped being impressed by his own life by then. He was just living it. She saw the article on her phone on an ordinary morning. She had to read his name twice, then the number attached to it, then his name again. Her relationship with the other man had ended 3 years earlier. It hadn't been a terrible breakup. It had just stopped working, the way things do when one person needs real connection and the other person doesn't know how to provide it. She had moved on, built her own career, created a decent life. But there was something she carried quietly that she didn't often name out loud, which was regret. Not regret for how her career had gone, not regret for the things she'd accomplished, regret for the person she had taken for granted, regret for the years she had treated a genuinely good man like a placeholder. She reached out through a mutual friend first. Just a casual mention that she'd seen the news, that she was happy for him, that it would be nice to catch up sometime. The mutual friend passed the message along. Daniel responded that he was well and that she was welcome to reach out directly. So she did. She sent a message that took her 3 tries to write. She kept it light. She said she'd been thinking about him and that if he was ever free, she'd love to grab dinner and just catch up as old friends. He replied the next morning. He said that sounded fine and suggested a place. She spent more time getting ready for that dinner than she would admit to anyone. She went over what she wanted to say. She thought about how she would bring up the past without sounding like she was making excuses. She thought about how to be honest without being dramatic. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood up when he saw her, which was just the kind of person he'd always been. He looked good, not in a showing-off way, just comfortable, like someone who had stopped trying to look like anything in particular and ended up looking better for it. The conversation was easy at the start. They caught up on practical things. She told him about her work. He told her briefly about the company. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which she had forgotten he always did. For a while it almost felt like the old days, the good version of the old days, and she let herself relax into it. Then she brought it up. Gently, carefully. She said she had done a lot of thinking over the years, that she had been unfair to him, that she hadn't understood at the time what she actually had. She said she missed him, not just as a memory but as a person, and that she had wondered more than once if they had ever given themselves a real chance. He didn't look away. He didn't look uncomfortable. He just listened, the way he always had, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she hadn't expected. He said he didn't regret how things had gone, not because it hadn't hurt, but because the hurt had pushed him somewhere he needed to go. He said he thought she was a wonderful person and that he genuinely wished her well. He said all of this without any edge to it, without any trace of wanting her to feel bad. And then, gently and without cruelty, he said he didn't think they were in the same place anymore. Not in terms of success or money or any of that. In terms of what they needed, what they were looking for. He had grown into a version of himself that had very specific things it wanted, and he was honest enough with himself to know that going backwards wasn't one of them. She nodded. She said she understood. She wasn't sure she did, fully, in that moment. But she said it. They finished dinner. He walked her to her car. He hugged her at the door like an old friend, which was exactly what he was. She drove home feeling something she couldn't immediately name. It took her most of the night to figure out what it was. It was the feeling of a door that you left open for years, finally closing. Not slamming, just closing. Quietly, firmly, with complete peace on the other side of it. Daniel didn't think about the dinner very much after that night. He had an early call the next morning with a team in another time zone. And after that, a board meeting. And after that, he went for a run along the river near his apartment, like he did every Thursday. His life was full. Not full in a distracting, running away from something kind of full. Full in the way that happens when you spend years actually building something, rather than waiting for someone to show up and complete you. He didn't think of himself as someone who had won anything. He had just stayed the course long enough to find out who he was, when no one else was deciding that for him. The lesson in all of this isn't that being rejected leads to billions of dollars. Most people who get their heart broken do not end up on the cover of a business magazine. That's not the point. The point is simpler than that. The point is that 7 years of being someone's second choice will cost you. In time, in energy, in the version of yourself you could have been building during all those years of waiting. The moment Daniel stopped organizing his life around being chosen by someone who kept choosing someone else, everything changed. Not overnight. Not without pain, but it changed. And the person who once made him feel like he wasn't quite enough, eventually sat across from him at dinner, and realized, too late, that he had become exactly the kind of man she had always been looking for. He had just stopped waiting around to let her find that out.